Good morning. My name is Ming Long and I am a director on the board of CEDA. And just to note, I have sanitised my hands before I get up here. I'd like to welcome you to the formal proceedings for today's event featuring the Premier of New South Wales, the Honourable Gladys Berejiklian, where she will be speaking about New South Wales' road to recovery as we continue to navigate COVID-19. I would like to begin by acknowledging today and every day that we are on Aboriginal land. Acknowledge the custodianship Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have had over this land for over 60,000 years, handing down culture, knowledge and language to future generations. We respect the elders of Indigenous Australians and could learn much from their custodianship of the land, as we hand our legacy to future generations. We stand on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and would like to welcome any Aboriginal leaders present today. And as we discuss the road to recovery, I encourage everyone participating in this live stream event to consider what can you do to progress opportunity and equity for Indigenous Australians. Can I also acknowledge a number of dignitaries, and these are people who serve the people of New South Wales who have joined us in the room today. The Honourable Dominic Perrottet, New South Wales Treasurer. I don't know where they all are, but they're in the room. The Honourable Rob Stokes, Minister for Planning and Public Spaces. The Honourable Victor Dominello, Minister for Innovation and Better Regulation. The Honourable Brad Hazzard, Minister for Health and Medical Research. The Honourable Stuart Ayres, Minister for Jobs, Investment, Tourism and Western Sydney. The Honourable Gabrielle Upton, Parliamentary Secretary to the New South Wales Premier. Councillor Michael Regan, Mayor of Northern Beaches Council. Paul McClintock, AO, CEDA Honorary Life Trustee. And Tim Beasley, AC, CEDA Honorary Life Trustee. And a warm welcome to all of the CEDA delegates who have joined us in person today. And this is in accordance with all of our health regulations. I will note that all of you have hand sanitisers on your table. I expect you to use it and to take it with you. We also have people obviously on CEDA's live stream. Over the coming months at CEDA, we'll be making a range of events across key issues available in digital formats to ensure CEDA members and the community more broadly have access and discussion on the most important issues impacting Australia's economic and social development. As these details are confirmed, they will be made available on CEDA's website, ceda.com.au. And I encourage you to check the website for more details. We are also producing regular podcasts and video interviews with leading experts and policymakers to ensure you remain up to date with quality information on key issues impacting the economy more broadly and in key sectors such as health and resources. These will also be available on CEDA's website. Today, you'll be able to interact through our Q&A portal, which is available via the link on your screen, or you can enter the details by going to ceda.pigeonhole.at using the passcode NSWPOL. Click the link and you can add your questions for our speakers. They will then also be provided to the facilitator on stage. You can also join the conversation on Twitter using today's hashtag, which is hashtag New South Wales Poll, and tagging CEDA at CEDA_news. Please tweet and tweet often. Can I also thank today's sponsor? Thank you, Westpac. Thank you for your support of CEDA, which allows us to bring these events to life. And I think for many of you, this is the first human event you've been to for quite some time. So welcome and thank you, Westpac, for allowing us to hold this event. This is quite important at this important juncture for our country. And a warm welcome to 2GB presenter Jim Wilson, who will shortly facilitate the discussion. For now, let me invite our keynote speaker, who really needs no introduction, the Premier of New South Wales, to lead this important discussion. And can I be so bold, Premier, to thank you and your team on behalf of the people of New South Wales for your efforts to keep us safe through the bushfires and now also through the pandemic. After someone cleans the lectern, we'll get you, because we don't want you to get sick, we'll get you to come up. Please welcome the Honourable Gladys Berejiklian.
I might use that mic. Thank you so much, Ming, for that very warm and generous introduction. And thank you, CEDA, for hosting us today at this very, very safe COVID-safe event. And I thank you for taking that extra level of care, because all of us in New South Wales, as I've been saying for the past little while, are on high alert, and I appreciate CEDA going to that extra level. And as you suggested, this is my first person-to-person event since the pandemic began. And it's nice to be here in a room with so many distinguished Australians, leaders of business, leaders of community, consuls general, and of course, my ministerial and parliamentary colleagues, past and present. And I say to everybody here and everybody who might be watching this event elsewhere that New South Wales has done well to date because we have a strong team. You might see some of us on the TV more frequently than others, but please know that we rely on experts every day, and we also rely on each other to make sure we make the best decisions on behalf of our citizens. And I note the Health Minister and I had a conversation a few days ago, and he said, I never thought when I accepted the job that I'd have to deal with a pandemic, but that is the situation that we're in. And I suspect many of you in your roles as senior executives, as CEOs, as managers of large agencies would also recognise that. And I also note in the room key members of the New South Wales Public Service and acknowledge their presence and their efforts, because it has been, as I said, a very big team effort in New South Wales, and that obviously continues. And my gratitude to the community and to the strong leadership we have is unparalleled. But today, when I accepted to speak today, I did not envisage what stage of the pandemic we would be in. But it's important for us to note that notwithstanding the challenges of the pandemic, that our government is focused on keeping things moving, keeping things going. And of course, the health and safety of our citizens is always paramount. But also, what is paramount to us is making sure we keep people employed, making sure we have business continuity, and making sure that we provide hope for the citizens of this great state. So our COVID recovery plan needs to be seen in the context of making sure that we put the health and safety of our residents first and foremost, but also that we balance those health needs with the more broader needs of our economy and our communities. And so our COVID recovery plan, I think I meant to press the buzzer myself. The COVID recovery plan focuses on 6 key areas. So firstly, our infrastructure, and I'll go through each of them very quickly before Jim interrogates me on the stage. So the 6 main points are firstly our infrastructure pipeline, which is a key driver of jobs and a demonstrated area of leadership for New South Wales. Our planning and precincts are really important for us to not only accelerate our planning processes, but also develop those key precincts. Our education and skills, obviously, managing and ensuring we have the jobs of the future is key, and education and skills are key to that. Digitisation, both in improving what we offer our citizens, but also improving the way we do things as a government. Fifthly, advanced manufacturing and local supply chains, and the pandemic has actually opened our eyes in New South Wales of what we're capable of in terms of local supply chains. And finally, I'll comment on federal-state relations. Firstly, in relation to the infrastructure pipeline, and can I acknowledge many of you in this room who've contributed to this process, and thank you to the good efforts of our Treasurer. We have, Dominic Perrottet, we have $100 billion to invest in infrastructure over the next 4 years. And just to put that in context, it's double the next nearest state. It's more than what Hong Kong or Singapore spend. And whilst the states are mainly responsible in infrastructure, it's pretty much the amount of money that the Commonwealth would spend over a decade compared to what we're spending over just 4 years. And we've managed to keep those projects going during the pandemic, and we intend to do that. In fact, some projects have been accelerated because when you have less people moving around, it actually makes it easier to build things so long as it's done in a COVID-safe way. And we've actually seen some projects accelerate their delivery times because of this. This is resulting in 88,000 direct jobs. And part of our response to the pandemic was bringing forward $3 billion of new money to accelerate what we call those screwdriver projects. If you listen to what the chair or the governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia has said, and also listen to what chief economists have said at state and federal level, they've said it's really important to generate jobs, not just on the larger projects, but the small to medium-sized ones. And that makes a big difference in our local communities. And of course, we've also made sure we've got those innovations that New South Wales is known for, such as the innovative funding models and also our asset recycling programs, which are help funding this infrastructure pipeline. I know the Minister for Planning, Rob Stokes, is in the room, and can I thank him for his wonderful efforts during the pandemic and beyond. He has managed to accelerate the approval of 49 key projects in New South Wales, in the regions and in the cities, and those projects in total are worth $13.5 billion, not insignificant. He's also managed through the reforms, managed through this process to cut times it takes for us to make approvals. And for some of you in this room, you can appreciate how long some of these timeframes take. So we are announcing today that rezoning proposals will be cut by 191 days. That's still a long time, but it's 33% less than what you normally spend. So that in itself is quite significant. DAs for large regional projects, and we're talking about big projects in the regions, we're cutting by 91 days on average, and that's a reduction of 25% of wait times. And also projects of state significance we're trying to reduce by at least 3 weeks, which is a 17% reduction in wait time. So we're introducing these reforms and cutting red tape to really accelerate our ability to build more and deliver more, but also encourage private investment. And I'm very pleased to say that we now have 48 out of 128 councils on e-planning. E-planning is a real-time information opportunity which shows where every single application in New South Wales is, and we're trying to encourage more councils to get on that as part of our reform process. But also importantly, we've identified at least 5 regional activation precincts, and 3 big ones of those are parks where the Inland Rail's going through. Wagga Wagga and Williamtown are examples of where we're really generating regional jobs through those activation precincts as well. And interestingly, global interest in these projects hasn't dissipated during the pandemic, and that's something obviously we're trying to encourage as a COVID-safe way of doing business and increasing jobs in the state. Education and skills we know is critical, not just at pre-pandemic, but obviously during and post-pandemic. And currently New South Wales is reviewing our curriculum after 30 years. We're reviewing how we present and provide vocational education and training through TAFE. But we're also working collaboratively with industry, universities and the TAFE sector to see how we can better provide those clearer pathways which are so critical. And we are keen to involve industry in this process much more than we have done in the past. And I think that's really exciting. We know that a highly skilled workforce will give us the edge into the future, and all of these plans that we're putting forward rely on having a highly educated workforce, both in the trades but also in the professions, and also obviously through university education as well. Digitisation, and Minister Dominello is here, and he talks at length about this. If he was up here, we'd be speaking for hours. But digitisation is a clear stream through all the activities we're doing. It's actually improving the way we deal with our citizens. During COVID, we've been able to get out information and also provide financial support to business and community organisations efficiently through Service New South Wales, which is our front office. We've been able to digitise a lot of processes. We have 1.6 million people in our state who've got a digital driver's licence and 70 different rebates you can apply for. In fact, in the last 3 years, our citizens have saved over $3 billion in discounts we've offered through Service New South Wales. So improving the customer experience is very positive, and that will continue. And as the Minister Health will proudly tell you, that what COVID has done is really open our eyes to the potential of areas like telehealth. And I note John Brogden from Lifeline is here as well, and the support that we can give people in physical health and mental health through telehealth has been amazing. We've seen a 700% increase, and in fact, when RPA Virtual Health did a survey of their patients, nearly 80% of them, actually 89% of them, said that after the initial physical face-to-face consultation, that they were very happy and preferred to get that treatment through telehealth purposes beyond that point, which is really positive. And this is an example where digitisation can still provide world-class services, but in a different way. And for people who live in remote and rural communities in particular, and people with complex chronic conditions, it's been very, very successful way of getting our health services out there. And I was very encouraged when I saw this, and encouraged our health people, our health experts, to continue down this path as an innovation we will continue post-COVID. Again, not just in physical health issues, but mental health issues, and especially to those in remote locations who can't travel to get that expert advice. And of course, through digitisation, we're also investing a record amount in cybersecurity to make sure that we have the best systems available, because the more data you collect, the more you rely on digitisation. You've got to make sure those services and those systems are as safe as possible. Of course, the future in advanced manufacturing and local supply chain is also very exciting. In New South Wales, when Minister Ayres and I, and Minister Ayres is the Minister for Jobs and Investment, when we did a call out to business to say, come and help us during the pandemic, who can retool and reskill and change the way they do things, and nearly 2,000 businesses came forward. Many of them have retooled and reskilled, and we've actually seen, and our eyes have been opened up to the capacity that's available now in retooling businesses. And in fact, Western Sydney, the new Aerotropolis, as part of our 3 cities strategy, is fast becoming the advanced manufacturing capital of the nation. And this morning, Minister Ayres announced very excitingly that CSIRO will now be moving up to 450 of its employees out to this new airport city, which works really well with those European, Japanese and North American companies who are already setting up shop there. And so the universities are there, the TAFE is there, CSIRO will be there, as will some very recognisable local and international brands. And that precinct itself will be Australia's gateway to advanced manufacturing, and that is a very exciting proposition. And again, of course, education and skills are key to this process. And finally, something that Treasurer Berejiklian in New South Wales has also been keen to push is that the pandemic, as our sixth part to the stage of our recovery, is really reliant on improving federal-state relations, both in terms of economics, but also in terms of how we deal with each other. And I think the National Cabinet process has contributed to that. COAG was set up in 1992, and when people say to me, how does the National Cabinet compare to COAG? I say National Cabinet's pretty much COAG without the red tape, which is quite illuminating. And I think the pandemic has demonstrated to us, because those of you in business, when you absorb shocks, have to be nimble and flexible and make difficult decisions. Governments normally have longer to do those things, but in a pandemic you don't. And so what the pandemic has taught us as governments, as leaders, is that we can also be flexible and nimble and capable of making decisions which can be implemented in a very short amount of time. So I think there's much we can do further on this front, but clearly this is a clear plank of our road to recovery. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will end my brief remarks there. I want to thank you all for the contribution and support you give my government. I want to especially thank all of you who've demonstrated leadership during difficult times. And we know that for business and for community, one of the most important things governments can do post, during and pre-pandemic is provide certainty, and that's certainly what we hope to achieve. And please know, and please note that my brief presentation here today should demonstrate and instill confidence in all of you that whilst we do deal with the health issues, we do deal with things that come our way which are unexpected, that our state has a very secure and certain strategy to not only get through the pandemic, but also to come out the other end in a position where we can provide our citizens with the best job opportunities and the best quality of life possible, not just in Australia, but on the planet. So thank you very much.
Oh, that's okay. I didn't need a separate shout out. I'll get over it. That's fine. Good afternoon. Welcome, Premier. Thank you for your comments. And Look, it's all happening as far as on my lap here, everyone. There's the iPad, which is going to be a lot of people who are watching online, who would just watch the Premier's address. They'll be asking questions. As far as about 800 people, I believe, have joined us online. So I really want to make sure that we can
Can you
get
ask them to wake up now that I've finished speaking?
Say that again?
Can you ask them to wake up now that I've finished speaking?
No, you had a captive audience. No, so you should. So we will be taking your questions and also taking questions from the floor and inside the room. It is a bit odd, isn't it, being back in front of a live audience?
It is. It's a novelty, a much appreciated one, but it's very COVID safe, so I'm feeling comfortable.
Very good. Welcome. It's great to see you again, and I know you'll be on the program this afternoon. I better get the drive plug away very early as far as 2GB 873, 131 873. Alex Hart's at the back, who'll be calling in. Very good. We have approximately about 30 minutes, so that will include some question and answers as well, Premier. And as I said, we'll be taking those questions also from the floor and also from the CEDA Pigeonhole app for those tuning in via the live stream. And those questions will begin, as I said, I want to give you as much time to ask those questions. The recovery, let's talk about the resilience of the community. Are you confident that they can adapt if you have to go down the path of further restrictions, in particular during this pandemic? Are you confident they can adapt? Because people, small businesses, CEOs in this room, their resilience has been tested, hasn't it?
Look, it certainly has. I think all of our resilience has been tested, but I say with a degree of comfort that we've learned a lot in the last 6 months. We've learned how to adapt. We've learned much more about the pandemic itself. We've learned about things through international experience. And I do feel that we're probably more resilient, more innovative than we give ourselves credit for. I was so pleasantly surprised, and I mentioned it in my introductory remarks, when nearly 2,000 businesses came forward and said, well, we want to put up our hand and be more innovative and adaptable. And sure enough, we now have some local supply chains of medical products we never had before. We have 2 prototypes of ventilators being constructed and manufactured here in New South Wales, which gives us heart. And so we know that the resilience that's been demonstrated by the community has been fantastic, but also the resilience and innovation demonstrated by business has been great as well. Because often when you put under pressure and often when curveballs come your way, you manage to adapt and be flexible and sometimes more courageous than what you normally would. Risk-taking, ironically and interestingly, is different in a pandemic because when various options are now closed to you, you've got to think, well, what else can I do to keep going? How can I keep my staff on board? What can I do to kind of have the edge if things get better or if things change? And I think that level of angst has converted into innovation in many respects and also resilience. And also it's been really interesting to note that productivity doesn't seem to have dissipated in a number of organisations, even though they might have people at work, working from home, or they might have more flexible hours. I think most of my friends that I know that work in the private sector are saying they've never worked so hard. But it doesn't mean they're necessarily turning up to the office every day. But I think productivity is an interesting thing to watch as well during this time. But I've been very heartened by the innovative way in which businesses and community organisations have responded and the resilience they've demonstrated, and also our ability to adapt quickly to a changing environment.
We talked about the first real wave of community transmission that we're coping with right now. When do you make the call on further restrictions, and do you believe that suppression is still the way to go rather than elimination?
Well, I think suppression is our only option because it's been demonstrated, I don't know anywhere in the world, especially when you're welcoming Australians coming back home. There's always an element of risk, certainly as Victoria's experienced as well. There's always an element of risk when you're welcoming people back home, but also, of course, community transmission. And we know that the disease is insidious and virulent, and sometimes it can be bubbling away without detection because some people, unfortunately, don't even demonstrate symptoms or very mild symptoms. And so, therefore, whilst we would all love to adopt a policy of elimination, it's, I think, unrealistic to assume we would get there. In fact, very unrealistic. And suppression is definitely the right strategy, definitely for a population the size of ours. You might be able to manage it if you have a very small population, which is very homogenous in what it does. But we're not that. Our strength is because we have the largest state population in Australia, more than a third of the nation's economy. In fact, at the moment, I would suggest we're probably contributing closer to 40 to 50% of the nation's wealth. Well, wealth in terms of economic terms, and productivity, and And I think as much as we'd all love to see it eliminated, it's an unrealistic strategy, and it does hurt our aspiration to at least have continuity. And so therefore suppression is the best strategy, but that's not going to be delivered perfectly either, because it relies on goodwill and it relies on everybody doing the right thing. So on paper, I mean, the Health Minister and I could tell you exactly from a health perspective what everybody needs to do not to get COVID. But will every single one of our 8 million citizens do it every 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Unfortunately not. And that's why when you can't guarantee 100% compliance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I don't know anyone who will claim that they can, we can't claim to go towards elimination, so we have to go towards suppression. And to date, even though we've had an outbreak, and yes, we are on high alert, and yes, I'm very concerned about it, but this is a good way for us to demonstrate our capacity to contact trace and to make sure that we keep the virus suppressed. And that's why it's so important for people to heed the warnings, to come forward and get tested, to make sure, because we know what the science is, we know what the facts are, but our level of success from this time onwards, and that's why I've said the next month is absolutely critical, the next round of success or failure is dependent upon our personal action, because we know the rules work, we know what the health advice is, and now it's up to all of us to actually implement it. And that's why, Ming, I don't say take this lightly, but the way in which you've approached today's function is outstanding in terms of how safe it is. And we hope that others follow this example.
Do you still think there's a complacency, though, amongst individuals in the community? And when you say you're going to stick with suppression, will you consider further restrictions in coming days?
Oh, I think we have to consider further restrictions. Any activity which is high risk, and we know what the high risk activity is, which is why we worked with the hotel industry this week to tighten restrictions there. The health advice tells us indoor events which don't respect the 4 square metre rule, or even if they do, indoor events with a certain number of people under certain circumstances, when they're not seated, everybody has to sit down. If you're in an indoor event, apart from the workers, of course, you have to be sitting down. You cannot mingle. That increases the transmission rates substantially. So we know what is safe, we know what is high risk, and I think there is definitely room for us to consider what else might be considered a high risk activity, and consider how we curtail some of that risk, because given what's occurred with the Victorian situation and the level of community transmission in New South Wales at this stage, that we should look at curtailing some high-risk activity in relation to maintaining that suppression strategy.
You mentioned infrastructure. There's a lot of talk of infrastructure-led recovery with a number of announcements already made. You mentioned Minister Stuart Ayres, who will be also joining me on the program this afternoon on 2GB about the CSIRO. That's another plug that I've just got in there. Will your government be directing any money spent on infrastructure in terms of where it is needed and where that investment can create the greatest economic benefit?
Well, we've already done that, Jim. Very pleasingly, we've accelerated $3 billion worth of new money to smaller and medium-sized projects, and I keep saying projects equal jobs. But what is also positive about this process, and that's why I was very keen to outline the 6 different points, or the six themes that are really going to lead to our recovery through COVID, is they're all linked. So the planning reforms the Planning Minister has been overseeing are absolutely key to expediting our infrastructure program, but also in building up business confidence to invest as well. So our government investment in infrastructure gives confidence for business to invest, but also to ensure that that level of economic activity continues. And I'm incredibly proud of the fact that even when New South Wales was going through a very difficult time in March and April, we still had construction continuing. COVID-safe workplaces were able to continue, and we were able to actually maintain that pipeline, and in some cases even accelerate that pipeline where it was COVID safe to do so. So there's a very strong link between a strong economy, which the Treasurer is managing for us, with our planning reforms, which the Planning Minister is managing, our precincts policy and the Western Sydney Aerotropolis, which Minister Ayres is managing, and of course this is all contingent on having a good ability to contain the virus so that all of us can keep doing this.
Do you remain confident the Aerotropolis will still generate, I think you said a couple of years ago, 200,000 jobs?
Absolutely.
Now, even going through COVID?
The Aerotropolis is so on track, it's not funny. In fact, the CSIRO announcement today is a really great feather in our cap, because not only do we already have great global brands from Japan, the US, Germany, UK already setting up shop there, Last week, I also announced Amazon will have hundreds of jobs out there by the end of next year. It'll be the first place in the Southern Hemisphere where they're using robotics technology to distribute all of their, product all across the continent. So it's pretty exciting to know that when we say we want that to be the advanced manufacturing capital of Australia, it's not just words, it's actually happening right before our eyes. And every time I go out there, I'm astounded by how much progress there is. So long as we keep COVID-safe construction sites going, and so long as that level of interest is there. In fact, I think many more globals and many interesting geopolitical issues are allowing people to look more favourably at New South Wales in particular as a safe place to do business and a safe place to have employees in the future, and that's really exciting for us. And so there are these green shoots emerging even during the most difficult days of the pandemic, that we need to stay on course, need to stay key to our strategies, and at the other end, I think we'll be in a good position to move forward.
But air travel into that hub at the Aerotropolis.
Oh, look, there's no doubt that international travel is very challenging. But remember, the new airport isn't due to open out there till 2026. So by that, we'll be well and truly behind. This period will be well and truly behind us. But what's really important for us is to make sure that whether it's the transport infrastructure, whether it's encouraging those private organisations to start building their firms, and for the universities and the TAFE and the CSIRO now to start managing their plans, by that time we'll be well and truly ready to kickstart that precinct. But interestingly, a lot of the companies I've mentioned will already be up and running before the airport opens, which is very exciting. But then once the airport opens, it's not just providing a direct air link to key markets for us. It's also about opening up the central west of New South Wales. The regional freight will be able to stop there instead of having to travel the extra 2 or 3 hours to other ports. And I think there's enormous opportunities to get fresh produce, which doesn't have to be frozen, but fresh produce which can go from the Central West to Western Sydney Airport and out to our markets is a really exciting prospect as well.
So you don't see businesses that have committed to the Aerotropolis turning away because of COVID? You think it will actually be, because you do make the point it is 2026 for the official opening.
I think quite the opposite. Yeah. I think people are actually relieved that that's where they decided to set up shop. I think people are actually relieved they've decided to set up a footprint there. And if anything, we're actually getting more interest, not less, which is encouraging. Okay.
Planning reforms. Part of your plan focuses on what you call unblocking developments that are already in the system. How do you ensure the usual assessment rigour applies when you rush through the approval process? For example, you mentioned some figures there. Rezoning decisions cut by 6 months, 191 days. Cuts to approvals process for regional development and major projects by around 15%. Can you assure that those measures that are in place, those assessment will apply?
Absolutely, and Minister Stokes, I'm pleased, is here because he's managed this process to date absolutely brilliantly in that we are not speeding up what has to be done, so you can't cut corners. It's just making sure the assessment at each stage is done as efficiently as possible. And what e-planning is done, but often state government might get blamed for something that's taking a long time, but you might find that it's a particular agency or a particular council or a particular part of the system where the blockage occurs. And our e-planning system means that both the state government's more accountable, but so is every single council. And we're hoping by mid-next year to have every single council on our e-planning system. So everyone who has a proposal can actually see how many days it's taking and what any hold-ups are. But please be assured that our assessments are as rigorous as ever, but obviously we're putting more energy into reducing blockages and dealing with obstacles as they come up to make sure things are delivered in a timely way. And it's been quite refreshing being able to do that during the pandemic because we're so focused as we should be on jobs. I mean, it still breaks my heart that 221,000 families, people lost their jobs from the end of March to the beginning of May, and we know that we've got hundreds and thousands of others still on JobKeeper. So anything we can do to accelerate projects, accelerate private investment, give people confidence to create those jobs or keep jobs is really critical, and that's why planning has been so critical to this process, but also the precinct development. And I didn't mention it specifically, but the Greater Sydney Commission gave us great advice on our 3-city strategy. So we're in the eastern city, Parramatta is a central city, and the Aerotropolis is the western city. And each of these cities has major precincts we're developing. So recently, Atlassian announced they'll be the anchor tenant in our central to Everleigh IT hub. And when the head of when Scott Farquhar, one of the co-founders of Atlassian, gets up there and says he believes that could be a leading IT precinct on the planet, that gives us heart. 25,000 jobs just there. We've had enormous interest from other companies who want to set up shop there now as well. In Parramatta, we have the Westmead precinct, health education precinct, where the greatest number of jobs created in health and in education will be there. And then, of course, the Aerotropolis. And what's interesting is some global companies want a foothold in each of those three key areas. So not only are we developing these three cities which will be connected through transport and other links, but we're also developing these precincts which are going to be huge innovation hubs for jobs, but also cutting-edge technology and skills development, which hopefully will give New South Wales the edge into the future.
We're getting some questions through on our Pigeonhole app from those people, about 800 people who are watching online. We'll get to those questions very shortly, also some questions from the floor. John Brogden, who's the chairman of Lifeline, who does a wonderful job with Lifeline. And boy, do we need Lifeline and organisations like Beyond Blue right now. His fear, we were just having a chat before the function started, is about when JobKeeper ends at the end of September. Now, do you believe that the federal government, the Morrison government, will keep some sort of financial assistance package? And how concerned are you about the impact on the community and on the economy when that JobKeeper program ends at the end of September?
Well, I think just as companies are looking at their balance sheets to see what depth they have and what resilience they have, governments are no different. And I like the fact, I think JobKeeper was a wonderful public policy announcement, I have to say. But the federal government's also been very clear on what they can afford and what time frame. And so I envisage there might be some specific targeted support beyond that point, but the federal government's been very clear to all of us. And in fact, we've manage some of our strategies in keeping with that time frame. And can I just give a huge shout out to John Brogden and Lifeline, because I think the number of cases they've had to deal with during COVID's been horrific. And Victoria now is going through huge spikes as well. And every time there's a major outbreak anywhere in Australia, including in New South Wales, we see those numbers go up. But also I think there is a huge underlying concern about job security. And I was just discussing with people before I came to the event, people aren't talking about how stressed they are. If there's two adults in a household, one of them is likely to have lost their job, the other one's likely to have had reduced hours or reduced pay or both. And I think there is a stress in households that's not being spoken about a lot because people are embarrassed. And I think we are only touching the surface of what's really going on behind the scenes, and that worries me. And that's why the strategy I've outlined today is all about keeping jobs and creating those jobs in industries where we can. There'll be a net deficit though, because all the economists have told us the economy will be contracting, and we hope the contraction in New South Wales won't be as severe as other places. But we know there'll be a deficit of jobs. And so what we need to do is really encourage and stimulate business continuity in those sectors that can keep going. And those sectors that have been hardest hit, whether it's the airline industry or hospitality, we need to provide some reskilling opportunities. I mean, we were so heartened when we provided free short TAFE courses for people who wanted to reskill whilst they're at home. A number of people took up medical accreditation in medical record keeping and the like, but we had nearly 100,000 people complete those short courses whilst we were in lockdown. So the yearning, and there weren't just young people either, there were people of all ages. So that yearning to reskill and retool is very apparent. But it does worry me what happens when JobKeeper finishes, and that's why the policies we've adopted in New South Wales are about getting that right balance. And there is no rule book. Nowhere on the planet has that right balance been sought. It's not going to happen. And unfortunately, when you're dealing in a pandemic, the medical data you get tells you what likely happened 2 weeks ago. It doesn't tell you what happened yesterday. Most of you, depending on what business you're in, the data you get will tell you, will be a spot in time as to what you're dealing with. But in a pandemic, the data you get, as good as it is, gives you a snapshot of perhaps what happened in the last 14 days, or it could be the last 3 days, you're not sure, but it's a snapshot of what could have happened in the last 2 weeks. So it's a very different situation. There is a science, but it's nowhere an exact science, and that's why there's no rule book or playbook. And that's why that balance is so key. And that's why, please know, as I said, you might see my face on TV more frequently than others in my team, but please know that we are supported as a government by strong leadership, strong decision making, and relying on expert advice and getting that right balance to make good decisions.
Okay, let's take some questions from the floor. We've got some roving microphones, and then we'll go to some questions from online, which I'll give to the Premier very shortly. So any questions from the floor? If I will bring the microphone to you, please. If you can just your name and you just say your company or where you're from, that would be great.
Sanitise the microphones in between too. Yeah.
Thank you, Premier.
It's all on the table.
Yes, exactly. Sanitised microphones are on the are available. So any questions from the floor before we go to the online? Yes, just one moment. Just we'll bring a microphone to you.
Thank you, Premier. You mentioned when it comes to COVID the idea that we're several weeks behind the spread of the virus. And I guess my question is, when it comes to managing and predicting community spread of the virus, are you personally confident that at a state level and at a federal level we are leaving no stone unturned and doing everything we can from a technology and a data perspective to better manage this virus? Because I think we know what the economic and health costs are, but also there's potentially a huge opportunity for the state if we can signal to the world that we're the best at this, that we've got the best plan, and in light of the investments being made in Western Sydney, that there's potential for even more to be made for international countries that are and companies that are looking for a stable place to invest.
Yep, great question. Minister Dominello probably talks about data in every one of our meetings, at least for half the time that we're there. But I'm incredibly proud of the fact that data has been our best friend during this process. In fact, data on mobility gave us a very good indication early on movements and the correlation with the virus. Data early on gave us a very good read on testing. Can I thank Health for deciding from Australia Day to start their testing in a huge way? It's been consistent, so it's allowed us to follow the trends and follow what's happening there. But also, we're the only state government that has real-time information on where the cases are, where the pop-up clinics are. We have real-time information to the public. And I've even had some commentators come in to me, oh, you just blurt everything out. Yes, we do, because it's in the public interest. As soon as we get data, we make it publicly available. And Service New South Wales has been outstanding. We've literally had hundreds of thousands of people contact Service New South Wales and get through data, through our ability to capture data, direct information, direct benefit. So not only has data helped us make those key decisions, but it's also allowing us to get support where it's needed the most and information out and data. And that's why it's no secret that digitisation is one of the 6 key things that will get us through this pandemic. And because we had a strong foothold already in managing that in New South Wales, we've been able to take it to the next level and had people respond to it positively. And our Service New South Wales brand is a very popular brand where people know they can get there for help if they're not quite sure. We've got a great a concierge service now. So if you ring up that number 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if the person at the end of the online question or the person on the end of the phone can't help you, they will tell you who can. And so when Minister Dominello asked me for 1,000 extra Service New South Wales staff right at the beginning of the pandemic, we said yes. I said yes, absolutely, because we knew that managing data and getting information out would be key to our success. But the digitisation has been amazing at all aspects. So I mentioned e-planning and e-health. And e-health, I mean, to have an increase of 700% in the use of telehealth, but then to have people using telehealth, 89% of them say they prefer that to the regular physical consultation is huge. So I think in the period we measured, in the 4 months, there was 87,000 extra people who were getting benefit out of telehealth. And whether that's through a counselling service or a consultation if you have a chronic illness, I mean, that ability to digitise, so it's a combination of data but also digitising services that can help us improve the way we do things. But data is absolutely critical to everything we do. And it's not so much that we don't have data that gives us a snapshot of what's happening today coherently, but there is a level of variability in the timeframes when you get the data. So, but our systems are quite becoming more and more advanced in being able to use data to drive a lot of our decision making more and more.
Thank you, Premier. Any other questions from the floor? Thank you, Paul.
One over there, in the corner.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Premier. Melina Morrison from the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals. It's wonderful to hear your support for small and medium enterprises through the Accelerator Fund. It was the first time I heard it today, so congratulations to the government. One of the risks post-COVID is as the smaller enterprises go under in our communities, we could hollow out corporate diversity and therefore competition in markets. What else can governments do to protect corporate diversity and keep that rich diversity of businesses that not only keep the jobs local but also make the money stick to the New South Wales economy?
Yeah, no, great question. I also feel that companies and corporates and mutuals, no matter what size they are, realise that diversity is a strength and it actually complements your balance sheet and doesn't detract from it. So those companies that haven't been diverse, haven't been able to adapt, haven't actually had a good balance of diverse decision-making but also diversity in their staff, have not done as well as those that have. So I actually think that's a strength. I'm less worried about that than other things, to be honest. But I do feel the better that we manage, obviously, the virus and the more continuity we provide, a lot of those smaller and medium-sized enterprises are actually doing quite better because the smaller you are, the more flexible you are, the more nimble you are. It's actually more difficult at times for larger organisations to change what they've been doing for a long time and get that message out to all of their staff. So it's quite interesting that I've seen a lot of great innovation in some of the small companies. In fact, a lot of the companies that we contacted in the retooling weren't large enough for us to purchase from, but we put them in touch with community organisations. So, for example, a number of boutique companies that produce alcohol were then able to transfer some of those productions to hand sanitisation or hand sanitisers. Some of them weren't of sufficient scale for us to purchase from, or the schools or education to purchase from, but certainly we put them in touch with smaller organisations and established those supply chains. So I don't think in this environment size matters. It's more how brave and innovative you are and how flexible you are. And so I think, ironically, some smaller and medium-sized firms are being able to adapt more quickly than some of the larger ones. But I think the point you raise about diversity in services but also in personnel is critical. And I'm confident to an extent the market will sort that out as well.
Just a couple of questions from the Pigeonhole application. We are up against it with time restraints and with the Premier's schedule. Now, let's try to get through a couple of these. Question from Becky Wood from Oricon. The opportunity to build a collaboration to reform our approach to infrastructure is an inspiring possibility. What are the Premier's thoughts as to what industry should prioritise as part of this?
Right. What industries or what?
What are the Premier's thoughts as to what industry should prioritise as part of this?
Oh, great, in terms of the collaboration piece. Well, I think the great news for us is our infrastructure pipeline is so broad and of sufficient scale that virtually anyone can contribute to it. So because of our $3 billion acceleration fund, it means that very small projects in very small regional communities are up for grabs, as are the medium-sized and larger projects elsewhere. Another example of the use of digital, for example, in terms of how additional strains of companies can participate is now with the twin spatial technology we have, it means that engineering and planning can happen remotely and much more accurately. So I don't know if any of you, I'm assuming many of you have been exposed to that twin spatial technology, but in construction in New South Wales, it's growing great guns and it's really helping us with our infrastructure pipeline. So you could be an engineer or a planner living in a remote community, and so long as you've got internet capacity, you can actually support us or tender for planning and design work where you may never have been able to do that before. So I think we're increasing the breadth and depth of industry that can be involved. But also I think industry has a greater role to play and companies have a greater role to play in our education and skills process. What really excites me is our universities and TAFE and VET services work together really well. And in the future, industry might say, well, I don't actually want my staff member to have a TAFE qualification and I don't want them to have a degree, but I want them to have a hybrid qualification, which might involve a semester or two at uni and then 2 or 3 semesters at TAFE, and then having someone who's not quite an engineer but not quite a tradie, but kind of an advanced manufacturer, robotics expert in between. And so I think the education and skills piece is paramount to developing that specialisation we can get through infrastructure. And I also think that digital technology is instrumental to perhaps improving the way in which we can deliver infrastructure in more innovative ways. So it's limitless. And what I always tell my team is let's enhance that and not hinder it So let's allow the market, let's not be so prescriptive that the market can't come up with its own innovative solutions or its own ideas as well. So whilst we might say to them, we need a school, these days we don't tell them what colour it has to be and how large it, we just say to them, what is your best solution to building a modern school? Or what is your solution to building a modern train station? So I think we need to learn to be less prescriptive as well and allow that innovation to generate a lot of what we're doing.
Nearly to the end, a question on innovation, a very relevant one, especially right now as we try to obviously find vaccine for COVID. Will investment in research and development be included in the COVID response? Research and development is a proven pathway to job creation, innovation and advancement.
That is almost a Dorothy Dixer, Jim, because I'm looking straight at Gabrielle Upton, who's my parliamentary secretary, and I've tasked Gabrielle as my parliamentary secretary to actually drive research and development across government. She has got a crack board together doing just that. And instead of having it in a silo, it's now working, Gabrielle and her team are working across government as to how we can enhance our capacity to drive R&D across a whole range of things. I think we have the potential in medtech and fintech and other things to be global leaders, and Gabrielle is actually coordinating that on my behalf across government. So thank you for your work on that regard as well.
Premier, thank you. I think as Ming said earlier in the opening remarks, I think the leadership during the great unknown, even with the bushfires, and also through COVID, you're fine. No, you're fine. I want to give you some praise, some well-deserved praise. I think the leadership shown by the Premier during both the bushfires and the COVID pandemic, through the great unknown, has been absolutely superb. And I think the Premier deserves a big round of applause for showing true leadership. Thank you, Premier. And thank you, everyone who've been attended our function today online and also in this room. I think we also had another comment on that Pigeonhole app about just how well planned this was today, as far as social distancing, which the Premier touched on. So well done to everyone involved at CEDA and everyone here at the Four Seasons. To CEDA's delegates, the reminder that the Pigeonhole app will be open for an additional 15 minutes to submit questions. I'd also, on behalf of CEDA, and I know Ming welcomed our principal sponsor today, but a huge thanks to Westpac for their support and for those of you in the room for your attendance. Again, a recording of today's discussion will be sent to CEDA delegates in the post-event email. So to Ming, to David, thank you for your help as far as this event goes. I was asked if I would do this last week by CEDA and also by my good mate Sean Berry in the Premier's department, and I didn't hesitate because I think it's a very important discussion. It was actually nice to come back to a live audience. And also some very relevant questions. We've got, it is the great unknown, and certainly, as the Premier mentioned several times, we need resilience, and we've got to be united. Thank you for having me, and I'll see you you'll listen to me at 3 o'clock on 2GB 873. Thanks very much, everyone.